Welcome to the last, but certainly not least, episode of our October Cybersecurity Awareness Month of 2024 lineup and series. We've got an exclusive here on Detection Engineering Dispatch, our podcast. I'm Alex, hosting all of your DE content and bringing the very latest in what's happening in the DE space, and oftentimes with a little bit of spice. So if you enjoy our content and you want to stay in the loop with it, you can join us on Zoom here live bi-weekly, or you can catch the replays on our YouTube channel and now available on Spotify as well. Today's topic is going to be a whole lot of spice now, which is going to be all about the good alert and threat hunting secret sauce. We're going to hit on the topic of what makes an alert good, how to keep them sharp and effective and not just noise generators, and who to better guide us through that than none other than Brady, aka we'll put his medium at here, and he is one of the sharpest minds in the security blogging space and on Medium. You've probably seen some of his killer insights in specifically how to strike the sweet spot between too many alerts or missing kind of the big threat. So Brady, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here.
So why don't we kick off the last episode of Cybersecurity Awareness Month? Tell us a little bit about you, what you've been up to, what you're working on, and what drew you to researching security.
Yeah, so currently I'm a principal detection and response engineer at Expel, but the path to get here was a little bit different. I didn't start out in security. I'm actually a career changer. So this is my second career, I guess you could say.
What was the first one?
The first one was pursuing baseball. I wanted to be first a player, like any young kid who plays baseball, and then eventually a general manager of a Major League Baseball team, and went down that path and had some fun going a little bit of the way, and then realized that this is something else that I think would be a fun thing to pursue. So that's the goal at this point, and that's what I'm doing.
Sports makes being in sports make the best team players and an active SOC. So I'm sure you brought in a lot of those principles.
Absolutely. I can't emphasize that enough. The background of being a team player and how that applies so much so in the security world and in a security operations center for sure.
And you know what? It's great that you've hit the security kind of landscape in the recent years, because I always say it's kind of where it counts. I find that it's more useful to be more adaptive to the ongoing insane changes that have happened in the last 5 years than someone who tells me, oh, I've been doing security since it started, like in the internet days. I'm like, that's not like, if you know how to wire up computers and servers, that's not going to really help you right now when everything has gone to the cloud.
Yeah, you can fall behind very quickly. As quickly as technology changes and threat actors are changing their tactics and techniques, it's very quick to fall behind unless you're staying very up to date with what's going on in the present landscape.
Yeah. So you're in security at a really good time. We've talked about how you've led some initiatives on risk-based alerting, and that has taken such a strong kind of allure in the space, and you've implemented it, you said, in your previous role.
Yeah. So I guess going a little bit back further to how I got into security, I started as a phishing analyst, and then I did that for a period of time, and I encountered some pain points of doing things manually that I didn't feel needed to be done manually. And then just like anything, I wanted to evolve into a different role. So I got into incident response. I did that for a couple of years, and then I got into threating and detection engineering. I then led a team. And throughout that course of progression into different roles, there was always certain pain points. And the biggest one that stuck out to me, and it seemed to be the most common problem experienced in other organizations, was that component of alert fatigue, that big decision and that big kind of, it's that scale of you need to detect a lot without alerting a lot. Yeah. And so I got introduced to this thing called risk-based alerting, actually from a former previous guest of yours, Jimmer. He's the first one who I heard anything about this concept. And the first time it was explained to me, I thought that was something that could really change the game and could help balance that scale of being able to detect a lot, but alert on few.
And so you've seen now, and that was how long ago you've implemented, has it been long enough for you to have seen like the long-term impacts of it? Is it like yay or nay? It's actually working?
Yeah, so I implemented it first, I would say about 5 years ago now. And yes, it works, but
That's
it's
awesome.
also not a silver bullet.
Mhm.
It's not something that you implement and you just set it and let it ride and you're good. Like anything, it requires maintenance. It also requires some really good detections to be a part of that risk-based alerting. And if I'm being honest, the risk-based alerting name I don't love because it sort of implies that the only way it's valuable is by assessing scores of things.
Mhm.
But the flexibility of implementing it allows you to do aggregation on other characteristics and other factors, which are just as valuable.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Going on the fact that even if you do it, I mean, it's a great baseline to strive towards. It can still be quite noisy, right? And so do you balance the, drowning in alerts, but without sacrificing missing some of those big fish potentially?
Yeah, so that's where I think threat hunting comes in. And so
Mhm.
the way that I found risk-based alerting or whatever you want to call it, aggregated alerting, the way I found it to be best implemented is when alerting is a mechanism of it. And so
Mhm.
it does take a little bit of time to understand what those thresholds are or what those chained activities are that you want to alert on and make
Mhm.
sure that that's feasible for a human to triage. But then the threat hunting component comes in for the other events that are taking place and that you're collecting that meet that threshold. And so what happens is you get this prioritized queue of events that are interesting but not worthy of sending to an analyst. And you can
Mhm.
review those and scan them very quickly on a daily basis and understand what groups of activity are suspicious that you want to investigate further and which ones are just a simple bad IOC hit that you don't even need to look at.
Yeah. So you group them, like you decide what is even worth chasing, what is not. The ones that are would then, take on an automation route. Like when does like a threat hunt turn into something that you want to go and built into as a detection, as an automated means of detection?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the threat hunt can start from a variety of different places. It can be a hypothesis, it can be something you got from a threat intel report, or it could just be something that you're curious that could be living in your data and you want to find anomalies in the data set. So regardless of the origin though, that process of threat hunting, you're starting big and continuously narrowing down to see if you can find that activity that you're looking for. And where it becomes valuable to me is when you can narrow that scope so much that the results you're returning from that threat hunt are very high efficacy and they do have enough value to send to an analyst. And so it's that ability to go from a very wide net and narrow it as you go and figure out what those components are of that hunt that only get the activity that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's always so interesting to me, and I feel like that's like such high pressure to even go and pursue. Like how do you prioritize? Like how is it are you like actively monitoring dark the dark net feed? Like do you have to read every single like threat report out there and then decide what to operationalize? Like coming up with that hypothesis would be such a high pressure situation for me. Like I think my anxiety would go through the roof. I'm like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, it's challenging. I would say it depends a lot on the maturity of the organization.
Yeah.
So if you're not very mature yet and you
Hmm.
don't have a great idea of your detection coverage yet, you first want to figure what you have out there.
Yeah.
What detections are out there. A lot of people they map them to MITRE, and so you can see a heat map of what you have detected and what you don't. And so something that's common is to look at what you don't have covered. There's a lot of content out there for figuring out what those tactics and techniques are and ways to detect them or ways you can hunt for them. And so I would call that sort of the low hanging fruit, the things that
Hmm.
have already been observed, and there's a lot of guidance on how to get those detected. And once you do that, then you can start filling those gaps and your detection coverage gets a little bit broader. So I would say that's like kind of the first level of when you're starting out. Once you've gotten good coverage, I think you can go deeper and you can be looking at more specific things for your environment and your organization. So a big part is knowledge of your attack surface. If you can figure out where all the doors are, if you will, for your organization, how people can enter, then you can start doing some threat modeling exercises and figuring out how you can defend against those doors being opened. So that can be very unique to an organization. And those hunts can be very fun because they're very specific and you have to do a lot of research and figuring out how that attack path would be successful.
Oh my God, so much to uncover there. let's start with MITRE. Like that whole MITRE coverage, what you have, what you don't have, what you're uncovered for across the entire, TTPs and even the sub techniques. Like how do you typically measure that? Like there's some every single point solution is going to have it some way or another, but I find that it's often so challenging to have this enterprise bird's eye view of if you're actually covered. Like I see it across spreadsheets, I see it across all of these different manual ways. It's hard to know where to start. And I know definitely a lot of companies, like they make that a whole services engagement to go in and tell you that, but it's hard to put it in practice. It's great in theory, it's great, it's great to work towards, but it's so hard to do in practice, and it just has to be done over like years, a span of years at a time.
Yeah, it's not an easy switch where you can just hit a button and then have great coverage. There's plenty of detections out there that you can deploy if you want that say they can detect a technique, but you need to tune those for your environment most of the time. You can't just turn them on, or else you lead to a lot of noise that you're not going to be able to take action on. So it is overwhelming. And I think the key though is that you want to have coverage across all the tactics as best as you can and as best as you have. Yeah. And it depends a lot on your visibility and the logging sources you have available and the tooling you have available. Some things are more feasible than others. And some organizations can do more because they have the tooling or the necessary logging and visibility to do those things. But yeah, it's a very tough challenge if your objectives is to light up the whole heat map. And even if you do that, it's really sometimes a false indication that you're safe. You touched on sub techniques, and just because you have one technique covered, that doesn't mean that every ability or every way that that technique can be achieved is covered. There's sub techniques and then a lot of nuance even within those sub techniques. So a way of saying that you're never safe, you're never fully covered by any one technique.
That's such a good point. And also the maintenance aspect, you touched on this too. Like even if you have this, the confidence that I might or bingo, I checked it, I have this covered. So much more goes into it to to see how long is that going to be covered for. Has there been any changes to the formatting that's going to keep that kind of rule healthy? Am I still like it can lead to a lot of roads of having a false sense of security if it's not properly tuned, and then all of these backlog tasks get added to the gist of it. And then also not all of the MITRE tactics and techniques will apply to you. Like I know there's some in there like on containers, or there's some in there on like certain things, like, and if maybe you don't have those things, they're not gonna apply to you. So but if we're going off the heat map, it's going to show that it's not covered. So it's like, oh, is that going to provide an actual accurate score? Maybe not. So it becomes this kind of ongoing target that is never ending chase.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to account for the risk for those techniques. And you had a good example of the technique not applying. And another example is maybe your entire fleet for your workforce, all the laptops are Macs, and maybe you have no Windows machines in your entire environment. And then you don't need to defend against PowerShell like other organizations may need to if they're a Windows shop. So yeah, it depends a lot on the organization, on what your objectives are and which techniques matter the most to you.
That's gotta reduce your risk by a whole lot if someone just says, oh, we're not going to do Windows.
Yep.
That's how I would do. So threat hunting, that's got to be such a great job, like or maybe the most fun part of it, I would say. How, like, what's your take when you're off, well, how do you get your ideas as to what you want to go off and threat hunt? How do you build these hypotheses? You mentioned, going after what you don't have, but let's say you've got yourself covered with MITRE. What's your inspo from going after these different threat hunts throughout your day?
It starts with curiosity of wondering what could be happening in your environment that you don't know about or that you can't see, and sort of that looming uncertainty of like, are we covered, or like, are we actually defending and detecting things that we should be? And so that curiosity, if that's burning, then you're always going to be trying to look out for something that you're not aware of.
Yeah.
Threat intel reports are good because they give you some insight into what's been observed in the wild. So that's a very good one. But it's also fun just to be curious, like I said, and to go into your logs and figure out using, honestly, it comes down to math. You can use a variety of different techniques. Machine learning is popping up more and more for different anomaly detection. But something simple like seeing if a process has spawned from a parent process for the first time. If that's the first time that's occurred in your environment, it's at least interesting and fascinating to understand why. And perhaps it's a malicious attempt, or perhaps it's just something that's happening for the first time. But I find the pursuit of threat hunting enjoyable because that's your opportunity to learn about the environment. If there was a magic button to just like find the threat, that'd be cool, but then you're not really understanding what's going on in your environment. And I really appreciate that component of it as well.
Do you find that like the data that or visibility is a problem when you're threat hunting? Because you can only threat hunt with what's available, and you don't know if tomorrow somebody in marketing is going to go turn on a SaaS application and they're throwing data in there, like, and that's not technically is a logging source. So I find that that's particularly challenging for threat hunters like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think of threat hunting, a lot of people think about how to assess a successful threat hunting program. And if you assess a threat hunting program on the evil that they're catching, then that's not really going to tell the whole story. A huge part of threat hunting is finding other issues that need to be resolved. So one of them is logging. So if you are conducting a threat modeling exercise and you figure out that there's an application that could be vulnerable and exploited, but you don't have the logs for that application, well, that's a finding, and that's a very important find. And maybe you are able to enable logging, and then you can sort of remediate that risk or mitigate that risk, and that's a huge finding. Like that's something very, very valuable.
Or maybe you find like something or like an alert that it didn't fire correctly, but then that means that you have to go tune something or configure something, and that's still a good finding.
Yeah, finding things that are broken, they're never ending. That's what it gets back to. You can't set things, forget them, because things are going to change or they're going to break, and how you discover those is important. And threat hunting is a mechanism that is very, very good at finding those broken things.
I think you just you're onto something here, Jeanette. I think we have to clip what he just said. Like, part of threat hunting is about finding something you have to do. I love that. Have you found that, like, in the spirit of all of these different vendors and their grandmas like launching AI, like there was absolutely no vendor, no booth, all of the conferences this past event season that I attended, which were almost all of them, that didn't have AI right in their booth somehow, somewhere, in their positioning, in their messaging, and sometimes even in their product names. Like, do you find that it's actually useful in real life application for this kind of work, or is it just still in the early phases? Is it just the marketing hype of it? Because there's some occurrences where some things could be useful, like you were mentioning earlier, first time occurrences, a first time process execution when it's not been seen before, event rarities, things like that. They could be useful. Have they been, is the real question.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's in its early days. There's a lot more to be done, but I think there are examples where it is impactful and it is valuable, but it's not, the easy button. It's not the answer. There's an approach that you can take of technology solving everything, or there's an approach saying that the technology can assist the humans. And I think it's the latter. I think the humans are necessary, but I also think there's technology that can enable the humans to act quicker and have a lot of information that helps them make decisions when they need to. And so it can certainly help, but I think it's helping for more context and really just another tool in the tool belt.
Yeah, I agree. It should be I've been calling it kind of like C4, like it should help your workout. It's not going to replace your workout. It just helps you do things faster. It gives you a little bit of energy to do it, but it's not gonna take up the work, right? It's not gonna change it, at least yet. Maybe it will in the future. Maybe it will. So that's interesting how automation fits into the puzzle in its early infancy stages. But as far as, I guess, to end the episode, like, what would you say? You write a lot about what makes a good alert a good alert. Like, what is there anything you want to tell our listeners, like what context that they need? What is that secret sauce behind a killer alert, and how can they make sure that their alerts actually mean something? Because you're right, that's what they're spending most of their time on, banging their head, is these false positives in alert volume.
Yeah, what I think of a good alert is an alert that tells a story. So if you're only giving one small morsel of activity in an alert to an analyst, they don't have the context to understand whether that's malicious or whether that's benign. And so a good alert will help add additional decision support to that alert. So you can bring in that context. You can get a lot more information from other log sources or from the origin and the intent of the detection. And all those things grouped together can help the analyst orient themselves a lot quicker and understand more of that bigger picture. And to go a little bit back to risk-based alerting, I think that's why it's so powerful, is because you can present a handful of events that took place with a timeline to an analyst, and they can see which actions the attacker or which actions took place, and figure out if these are more indicative of malicious activity or benign activity. And so when you can present a story to an analyst, that's what really helps them take quick action.
Yeah, I think that's such a breath of fresh air to put it that way. We at Anvologic, we have a very, no, I wouldn't say different approach to that. It's definitely incorporates like risk-based alerting. It's just a little bit done differently. It maps like threat identification of discrete events. So it tags everything that, you need to know about, or I guess you need to tag, but you not necessarily need to be notified of every time those events happen, like an RDP that has been seen, or a rare event scheduled, which things you should keep tabs on but not be alerted, obviously. But we do it in a way that's like multi-stage, and it correlates when these things happen in a sequence and after a certain amount of time, and upon like a correlated user, correlated cloud account, a correlated host. It's a little bit of a different approach, but we're not trying to coin risk-based alerting. I think if anything, I would call it like just a threat scenario. But I really appreciate your insights. I think absolutely it's been a breath of fresh air, especially for all of us that are drowning in alert fatigue. So if you haven't already, please check out Brady's Medium blog. He's got so much nuggets of wisdom. It's BR4DY5 on Medium, and we'll post it right here and in the chat. And Brady, I like stalked your Medium. Like you post on everything and all great stuff. So please keep doing that, because the SecOps community needs so much more information sharing and content like the ones you post. I gotta ask, what do you love most about the security operations community?
I think I like the open source nature. I think I like how there's so many people who are just trying to fight the same fight and share the ways they're doing that. And by sharing the information, your approaches and your ideas and your opinions, that sort of starts a conversation of, what is the best approach, or what's an approach that can work for you. And so it's taken me some courage to share some of my opinions. But the reason why I feel comfortable doing that is because I just contribute to the conversation. And if we're all open in this community, then we'll begin figuring out which opinions should stay the same and which ones with new information might be changed.
And we need you to keep doing it. And I mean, who best to write about it than if you do the work yourself? Like, you are so confident about it. Who best to do it, really?
Confident, I think, is a snapshot. It might be confidence in something that works today, but tomorrow there's going to be a different threat landscape and maybe different tooling and different approaches that can work better. And so you have to be ready to adapt and be ready to learn.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to see what new developments are in this space. And thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast having you on the podcast. So you are always welcome to come back on Detection Engineering Dispatch and keep dropping more wisdom. So until next time, everyone, let's make those alerts smarter and sharper and way less noisy.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Of course.